Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us in the panel, Share the Platform, Best Practices for Promoting Refugee Knowledge and Expertise. My name is Anita Fabos. I'll be the chair, but with me today are also my Share the Platform colleagues, Alfred Babo, Craig Mortley, and Leora Khan, as well as two members of our Board of Advisors, Halima Adams from Church World Service and Ayar Atta, who is a London-based social integration and education advocate. Just so that everybody knows, this session will be recorded and we will have copies of this recording available on our Share the Platform website. But if anybody does not want to be recorded, you are more than welcome to join us later. So I wanted to start us off by moving to Alfred Babo, who is going to introduce the concept and the mission of the Share the Platform initiative. Thanks, Alfred.
Thank you, Anita. I would like to thank everyone for joining this session. Usually toward the end of this kind of big event, people are kind of tired, and we're really grateful that you can join us to continue this conversation. So Share the Platform is a new initiative, and we are really grateful, happy to know that this initiative has been endorsed by IASFM, which has adopted our statement a couple of days ago. So we're happy to share what we have with you during this panel. So what is Share the Platform, and what do we argue in our statement? For us, research on forced migration provides critical input into the way policy related to refugees and forced migration is shaped. Research in general and global compacts on refugees have pushed for direct engagement and self-representation of refugees in the discussion about their conditions. But we can observe, whether we are academics or practitioners, we can observe that somehow refugees have traditionally been shut out of leadership and decision-making roles, and have all too often only been tokenized or used for their crisis story, or kind of as object of research just to collect information. Okay, so we at the Share the Platform believe that we should shift this way of doing things, whether in the research or whether working for refugees. We should shift this this approach, and that's what the concept of Share the Platform is bringing in the reflection. We believe that by working to center refugees' expertise, policy, programs, and practice can be improved. And this is even more relevant now, where we have to integrate this reflection in the context, global context, impacted by racial fights, by the movement like Black Lives Matter, like other trends related to how we decolonize the framework for social change, how we finally maybe put a light on the refugees' knowledge, the refugees' expertise, and how they could be part of the decision that's made for them, and how they could be involved in that. Especially today, in the context, again, where refugees seems to be really or more vulnerable than couples than previously. So we want to push for this shift. I would like now to maybe focus on our mission, and that's pretty straightforward. I can just say that it is established that best practice in programs serving the needs of marginalized population to partner with members of this population in program design, policy making, and action. However, in the field of refugee service, practice, policy, and research, the refugees themselves are less likely to be involved in decision making and knowledge production. Share the platform calls upon experts from refugee background to deliver the expertise on the unique needs and experiences on refugee populations in a wide variety of fields. Share the platform commits to supporting and training institutions and people from refugee background to move towards full partnership to create meaningful change in program design, policy making, and action. So this is our mission, and I would like at that point to invite you to visit our website and of course take the pledge that you will see on our website. I would like now to turn back to Anita for the rest of our panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Alfred. I'm very, very heartened by all of the movement in IASFM actually towards really creating meaningful change to it's not just foregrounding voices of people from refugee and forced migration backgrounds. It's really for us, I think, involving people with expertise in these areas in decision making and really modeling that. And I just wanted to suggest that our Share the Platform initiative is a bit of a model, I think, that we can share with other people. This organization was co-founded by two folks from refugee backgrounds and two folks from non-refugee backgrounds. But that's where we start now, but we just wanted to share that a few years ago at the last IASFM conference, we had a very different model where Leora and I, the two partners who do not come from a refugee background, had a very well-meaning intention to involve people with expertise from refugee backgrounds in a panel that we organized but did not co-organize. So what we're trying to do here is co-build and co-decide all of the important initiatives that we're doing, rather than doing something and inviting people to share with us. So that's sort of using our own selves, who thought that, speaking of myself, I thought that I had been quite refugee-centered in my practice, but there were a lot of different ways that I came to this process with certain blinders about where power shows up in initiatives that involve people from refugee and non-refugee backgrounds, and how those of us with more power and privilege in these spaces really do need to take a step back and question whether good intentions are enough, and whether we really need to do some more to truly share the platform. So going forward together, we do argue that the Share the Platform approach has significant benefits for our shared societies. Again, not thinking of refugees and people from forced migration backgrounds as guests or transitory or only temporarily part of our societies, but actually part of our shared societies, right? And we argue that societies that don't incorporate the skills and perspectives of people from refugee backgrounds are limiting themselves. And we furthermore invite forced migration organizations to take the lead to incorporate and foreground the expertise of people from refugee backgrounds in their practice. So our call, I think, as Alfred mentioned, is to go beyond including refugees only as participants. This requires us to take a conceptual shift and find ways to give sorry, this is where feminist scholarship is very important. People are not given rights, people have rights. and we need to make sure that refugees' rights are meaningfully represented in the practices that we do. And second, we need to think about the political economy of research and practice and really step up to find ways to address practical tasks that we need to have in place collectively. So in the next section of our workshop, we would really like to invite you and encourage you, our colleagues in forced migration studies, to identify some meaningful ways that we can take action towards sharing the platform. And this next segment of our workshop will be led by my colleagues Craig Mortley and Leora Khan. Thank you.
So good morning, everybody. So this is actually going to be something that you, our participants, are going to have to join us. And what we're going to do is we are really interested in asking you, how you will share the platform principles to your organization or institutions. And what we would like to do in the chat, there's going to be, Anna, can you put it in the chat, the Jamboard? We have a Jamboard, and what you're going to do is, we were going to put it in breakout rooms, but I think all of us are here today together. And I think, Anita, if you could be scribe, that would be great. And we would like, not us, the panelists, but everybody else on the call, to come up with some ideas for using this statement. And let's start with, just, they should put it in the chat, Anita, or how should we do it? Or this is really an important part of our panel because we really want input on how we can move forward with this. And, there you go. Hi, everybody. So if in the chat, if you can start writing down what you think can move us forward, that would be really great. So the idea is we'd like to see how let's just do one, if everybody puts one idea in on how you would share the platform to your own place of, where you work, and if you're working with other groups. So Susan, just put it in the chat. Is there only one person here?
No.
Okay. I don't see anybody doing anything.
I'm not shy. I'm just thinking about the best things to say. I mean, hello, everyone. And let me just say what I can say a little bit louder than I said yesterday, which is I used Share the Platform yesterday. I was in my, I was reviewing a student's work, and it made me cringe. She was a young white woman who had no refugee background. And she said about the Rohingya refugee camp, she said, I've developed a framework for how we can stop GBV in the camps. I mean, it was the most shocking, painful, cringeworthy, young, well-meaning statement. And instead of having to kind of go into like a really long discussion about how we need refugee inclusion in our research, I just sent her the link. It was great. and she wrote back and got it. So that's a small. I'm only saying that while everyone else is typing. I have lots of other ideas, but I did just want to share that because I used it in a really, really practical and easy way quite
That's
immediately.
That's fantastic. I mean, I think everybody should chime in, either put it in the chat or as Susan bravely has come on and unmuted herself. There's not a lot of us on there. So, you know, Christina, just, you know, if you want to unmute yourself and we'll write down what your thoughts are.
So I agree with Susan. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. I agree with Susan that, I mean, it's great to have a framework that we can send to other people. I think it's a great starting point. I also agree with her that we need to move away from this, can you share our story? And again, not to critique anyone who has, you know, put huge amounts of effort into organizing this event, but even yesterday's plenary session started with the story, even though the individual actually is a well-known scholar who has so much else to offer. I also think about Yen's keynote where she said, you know, people can also refuse. They can refuse to tell their story. And I think that's also the role of allies such as ourselves to intervene and say, why are we asking people to only share their story? Why are we not also recognizing that they're a whole person with the, you know, a range of different experiences? And again, I think it comes down to the fundamental of we need to be conscious and cognizant of involving people from the very beginning so that the whole session or the whole research project or whatever we're working on incorporates these ideas and the expertise from the very beginning of the project, and it's not an add-on at the end.
So it seems to
I
me
mean, oh, sorry.
those stories,
Go ahead.
sorry, those stories are really have always been sort of out there, and that's what people think they. I mean, Halima and I have talked about this when I was at a Church World Service event. Remember, Halima, they put the refugee in front of all the donors, and he told the hero story. And so I think, like as Halima has in the chat said, education is really important. And maybe what we can do are put like guidelines, suggested guidelines for, you know, how to work and present when, I mean, I think guidelines are good. I think that's what people expected and do expect. So places like, you know, organizations, they always put like the hero story, and that's what donors want to hear. And that's what we don't want. We have to re-educate public about it as well.
If I
I mean,
might
I
chime
think
in, any Leora, it also speaks to, I think, a deeper systemic, and I'm hearing the word sort of industrial complex, NGO industrial complex, where a lot of funding is often tied to success stories, and those success stories are often from the very dreadful and difficult ones to people thriving. So it's also a systemic change of valuing the expertise of folks and not just seeing them within their sort of crisis situation.
could I try an experiment out loud that I haven't given enough thought to? So this is a bit of a risky thought experiment, but I'm thinking about kind of the worst practice, and maybe is there a way that we could back out of that what best practice would look like? So worst practice is you don't involve refugees in the research at all, right? And then maybe you've taken one step better than that. And I love, Anita, your admission that, you know, you're on the journey yourself. I feel like I'm on the journey myself. One step back from that is you include them as research assistants. And I admit there was a time when I thought that was sufficient, right? I paid them. I felt like they were the beneficiary of a little bit of knowledge. At the time, that felt like enough, right? Then you could go one step further. I shouldn't say back it out. I should say forward it out, go forward, to involve them at the beginning of the design of the project. And then, of course, there's maybe even the further step, which is the the example that I think Halima mentioned, which is the education that would even precede the design of a particular project, so that they would be sufficiently knowledgeable to know where to look for the funding. So I'm just as an example, I just got an email from someone saying, would you be interested in being a part of this book project? And I'm thinking to myself, yes, I would. Well, that book project has already happened. I can't go back and say I don't want to. I can certainly write to them and say I'd like to do this as a co-authored piece, and I have some people in mind that I could think of who might want to work on that with me. But Leora, to your point, I would love to have some guidelines that I could look to once I already had that well-meaning idea, to say what would it look like to work with this person? Not that I write half the chapter, they do some of the translation. You know, where would I start with that process at the beginning, so that it was a genuine sharing of this research? Well, I think it would even precede my getting that email.
Yeah.
And I want to just say one thing about that. And I actually spoke with two of the scholars I think that do this the best in the refugee field, Eileen Pittaway and Linda Bartolomei. I just spoke with Linda the other day and talked about how excited I was about Share the Platform. She's equally excited, but her point, and she's right, is this stuff takes an extraordinary amount of time. I mean, finally, APRIN, for example, now has, Asia Pacific Refugee Rights Network, has a refugee, a person from a refugee background who is the chair. But APRIN's been around for 15 years. The process of the training of ensuring that these the political economies that were barriers, it took that long to bring them down. So sorry, I just talked a lot.
Thank you. No, thank you, Susan. This is all really great. We're going to have to move on to the next one, but what we're going to synthesize all of this stuff, and we're going to be sending out you know, an email from our, you know, about all of this stuff in our next newsletter. It's great. I mean, I think this is really valuable. Craig, you want to take it to the next question?
Yes. So I think, Susan, thank you for your comments. And you have kind of moved us on to the next question that we have. And that one we're asking, what barriers might you encounter in applying Share the Platform principles in your various fields? I think we identified some of the institutional and structural things. So same methods that we're doing. You can take yourself off mute and speak to what you think would be some of those barriers in implementing Share the Platform principles.
And Craig, I just want to say, for those people who have joined us later, really want people to participate. This is not about our thoughts, it's about your thoughts to move Share the Platform forward. So I know people have joined later on, so just unmute yourself, join in. If you don't want to talk, put these answers to the question in the chat, and we will put it on there.
We have a few responses in the chat. Keep them coming. So Susan mentioned accreditation in terms of within university spaces, and refugees being able to obtain credentials for their intellectual work. Christina mentioned academic funding structures within principal investigators and collaborators. Can you speak, Christina, if you're able to unmute, speak a little bit more to that?
So I'm just going to be very frank here. I think that academia is a very self-promotional, egocentric kind of place where people are constantly measuring themselves and other people against citation indices or things like this. And so I think it really disincentivizes people honoring and co-authoring and even taking a back seat and saying, actually, this is the work of other people and they should be not only first author, but in some cases only author. So I definitely think that this is a problem within the structures and the incentive structures. And it's something that I think, people like myself, a white settler who has tenure, have an opportunity to at least start to have this conversation with our colleagues and try to change the power structures.
Thank you, Christina. So Susan, you mentioned different ways of knowing, and part of our discussion within our Share the Platform group, this comes up a lot. Can you talk a little bit more to sort of how can we, within the space of academia, within the space of research, embrace and center some of those different ways of knowing for people who are not necessarily embedded in academia?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I don't actually have a very good answer because I find academic language can often be incredibly marginalizing for people that haven't been trained in it. And I want to be really clear, that has nothing to do with natural intelligence. It has to do simply with whether you've spent enough time in a university classroom to be able to use words like hermeneutic and ontological comfortably. And that's not about intelligence. That's literally whether you just happened to be lucky enough to be in those classes for that length of time. And there are many fields, and it's not true, I think, of the forced migration field entirely, but there are many fields in academia where if you can't talk the talk, it is very, very difficult to be able to establish your credibility. And so what ended up happening in a situation like that is that the academic, even a well-meaning one, would be the one to be writing the portions of an article, for example, or designing the portion of the research that attended to that kind of theory part. And what would be remaining for a potential partner would be the part that is often undervalued, not by me, but by many academic institutions. What would be considered the research assistant work or the empirical chewing. I actually think the empirical stuff is far more interesting, but that's not how academia necessarily sees it. I think there are fields where different ways of knowing that's starting to come out a lot more. So I'm encouraged to see that I think that's possible. And I would point to this conference as a terrific example of the many different ways of knowing that came out here. So all is not lost there, but I did want to put it down as a barrier because, as Christina pointed out, we are incentivized to have ownership over our own work, because otherwise we can be fired.
Thank you, Suzanne, for elaborating on that. And this is something that is coming up more and more in terms of those different ways of knowing. Or one of the things that I've seen a lot of is you'll collect the information, but as the academics, then you sort of re-narrate and explain people's position and people's lived experiences, not being from the background, not having expertise yourself in terms of that lived expertise, and using particular lens to determine what aspects of those experiences are valid or should be highlighted and promoted. Anybody else have other barriers that they think would, thinking of resettlement agencies, so moving a little bit outside of academia, resettlement agencies, people doing policy work. I'm not sure if there are folks on here who do that kind of work. What are some barriers you see, practical, sort of barriers you see implementing shared platform in those spaces?
I'd like to hear a bit more from Alfred, but the general gist of what I think is that, we often have colleagues from refugee backgrounds with academic expertise. So there's not even necessarily always a kind of lived experience versus analytical training or academic training. I feel like some of the things that I've heard from Alfred about being, maybe having one aspect of their academic background submerged or subordinated to the kind of refugee background. And I feel like, there are plenty of academics from refugee backgrounds who know the language, have the training, but for various reasons are not part of the power structures, the PI structures that Christina described. And there is maybe not enough intentionality in seeking people out, or we've in our Shared the Platform group have talked about pipelines, that the pipelines are not adequately created so that people from refugee backgrounds who are also academics or who are also humanitarians or who are also resettlement officers can take a space at the decision-making or principal investigator level. So I don't know, Alfred, if you had wanted to say something there as well.
Yes, thank you, Anita. Yeah, this is a great example for maybe just for in the academics to rely on my personal experience of how to navigate the situation where you have to deal with a new environment at the same time. That is part of one of my upcoming article in the Journal of International Migration, where I was sharing the difficulty, to go through the process of. I think Christina was talking about that. This process of publication. Sometimes you feel like you completely, your knowledge are just denied, or people don't recognize enough because you're coming from a different background, that now you have to start over everything, even though you have in a different environment, you should have had the same consideration, but everything is kind of everything is not considered with sufficient credential or credit, because you're coming from a different background. But I know that we have met those people, or you have already confronted your work at the international level, in different international conferences. You have been accepted, you have been already published in some international venues. But when you come to, in a college or at a university where you have to present a paper, when you receive the feedback, is like, they're sending you back to your first year of university. And somehow it comes as a refugee, it comes with a huge doubt on yourself, your knowledge. This is kind of circumstances where you feel like if you should stay in the academic, or if you should, do something else, right? Because it's difficult. But this is also the moment where you ask to do something which is trying to integrate the new body of production of knowledge. At the same time, you still have the, your personal background that you built on up, and especially for someone who's in the middle of his career. That means you have already built a career, you have already developed a research, background for years, and you have to jump into new academic field for you to be recognized. Otherwise, you will not make your path forward. at the university in Europe or in Canada or in the United States. But you have this background, you have this past research that you did. How do you connect this research, this knowledge that you built with the new path that's, this refugee situation is putting on you and in your academic career? So sometimes this is the situation that's, most refugees have to go through, especially for the, again, as I said, in the academic, where you be kind of taking a good balance if you want to succeed. But it's difficult, and you have to go through, the process. And of course, it can take time. And again, if you, in the middle of your career, you're not getting, younger, time is going, time is flying, and you will go through the whole process. Just to finish with my personal experience, I would say I got here when I already reached my position of professor at my university. And being professor at my university is it's a body of the African Research Council that gives you, that grants you this status of professor. So it's not only an institution in my country, it's an African body that do that, where you apply for the different promotion. But when I got here, of course, not only me, but many refugees, you have to start over, right? So you came as a professor, but you start over by, starting at the bottom, as assistant professor, and then associate, and then do all these things. So this is part of the reflection that we're talking about. And when we're building a research program, of course, for the first time, if the person doesn't know, or if the person doesn't want to, the leader of the program doesn't want to acknowledge the, all the first parts of your career, then you won't be part of the, the conception of the program. You won't be part of the design of the program. They might design the program and then call you to join the program or to associate you to the program. So that is this kind of difficulties that you can have in terms of barriers.
This is, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. I just want to acknowledge if new people have come on, we're going to move to the next question in a minute. But if there's new people that have come on, just please put either unmute yourself and talk, or if you're too shy, put the question in the chat. I mean, this is a workshop. We're trying to get ideas to move on the Share the Platform's mission. If there's anybody who wants to chime in, please do. So we're going to move on to the next question because we are sort of running over. And the next question is really, how do we overcome these barriers? It's really solutions. So we've talked a lot about the barriers, the, things that we're not doing. Let's talk about what we can do and come up and brainstorm with ideas about, actions that we can do. So let's go from there. Anybody want to in?
What supports people might need. So you've heard the concept. It's something you are thinking of implementing. What supports would you need to successfully implement Share the Platform in your work?
So, like as Susan said, what can universities do to support non-scholars for prior, what can we do? Like if we look at all the other, Anita, push it back. to the second question. Let's look at those barriers and, look at all of them, and then let's look at how we can do the supports. It's solutions. So whether, do we do mentorees? Do we have different, again, the guidelines, and help people work in the guidelines or something like that.
Maybe I can share. I can share something about Susan's question, based on what I'm doing with another organization that is, which is Scholar to Risk. I think for the last, since Scholar at Risk has been putting or calling refugees or scholars, exiled scholars on its board, we have kind of not a really big shift, but I think they kind of flexible and opening the body of people that they call scholar. Okay, so for example, it's not only researchers, but they're also acknowledging that some journalists, okay, for example, who are victims of persecution in the country and who have very good reputation, could be also supported, okay, because of their experience, because of their work. If they're victim of persecution, if they're victim of this any kind of discrimination, this organization is kind of opening, the identity or the profile of what they call scholars to support them and to help them by looking for universities which can host them for a while. And those universities, of course, to answer Susan's question, this university, even if they are not taking them as people to teach or to do research, but they're kind of involving them in some activities that will prepare them to transition to the journalist activity in the host country or the host community. So this is one example. So it's possible that people can support non-scholar, some institutions, some organizations can support non-scholar refugees. But of course, this is just a very small example. I don't know if someone else has another example.
Thank you, Alfred. I have a question. It's something that Christina posted about bias, and there's some inherent bias in terms of where we see sort of the positionality of refugees and their skill sets and what they bring to the table. How do we overcome those biases? And one of the presenters yesterday talked about, and you talked about it, Alfred, oftentimes people from forced migration background have to kind of start over. In some of the countries in the global south, many of the countries in the global north, almost look down on the credentials that people come with and their experience and their formal training. And so I want to pose that to the general folks here. How do we sort of work around some of those barriers, both within academia, within the nonprofit sector, within policy spaces?
Sorry, I'm trying to work and talk at the same time, and I mean write and talk at the same time, and I can barely do one. Craig, I think that question is a really, really excellent one, and if you don't mind my reflecting on a personal thing that's happening to me right now. I write on Myanmar, and I don't speak the language, and I am not from Myanmar, and there is an incredible trend in the Twitter sphere right now of we are tired of non-Myanmar people writing about us. We want to be writing about ourselves, and I respect that. I bear no ill will toward those that are posting that. There is a tendency to say, as an academic, you've spent too much time doing all that stuff I just talked about, studying hermeneutics. You're not on the ground enough, and so I think, that's frankly one of the many reasons why Share the Platform is so valuable, because what it says is, well, we know we don't have all the answers. For those of us that are willing to be part of something like Share the Platform, we are not saying that this mode of learning is the superior one. Far from it.